Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopoulos Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Welcome to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. My name is Jacob Kurtzer. I'm the Director and Senior Fellow of the Humanitarian Agenda at CSIS. We're very grateful for your joining us today for this important conversation on the path towards durable solutions in Myanmar. It's been 1 year since, or nearly 1 year since the military coup in Myanmar overthrew a democratically elected government, and a number of years since the crisis for the Rohingya in Rakhine State. And today's conversation is about what we can do as a community to achieve durable solutions for both the humanitarian and human rights challenges inside Myanmar and in its neighboring Bangladesh. We're very grateful as well for our esteemed panelists joining us today. To start our event off today, we have Congressman Steve Chabot, and we're very grateful for your joining us, Congressman. Congressman Chabot is the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia, the Pacific, Central Asia, and Nonproliferation. In his over 24 years in Congress, Congressman Chabot has visited Burma twice and has been a longtime champion of the Burmese people. And we're very grateful for your joining us today. Congressman Chabot, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank CSIS for having this discussion on the humanitarian crisis in Burma or Myanmar. I'll be referring to it as Burma. As a longtime member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and now the ranking member of the Asia Pacific Subcommittee, I've made Burma a particular focus over a number of years. As everyone participating here, I'm sure knows, Burma is facing two principal ongoing crises, a political crisis following the coup and a humanitarian one as well. These crises are inseparably linked, and both are a direct result of the Burmese military's brutal resolve to stay in power, whatever the cost to the country, whatever the cost to the people of Burma. In terms of the humanitarian situation, the problems facing Burma are, let's face it, daunting. And thanks to the coup, they have gotten exponentially worse as the situation continues to deteriorate. The Tatmadao's ongoing atrocities, both before and after the coup, continues to displace more and more people, while its insistence on maintaining control has put it in direct opposition to the population at large, leading in turn to the disintegration of normal life. The violence has driven 30,000 Chen into India. Thousands of other minorities have fled into other countries, Thailand, for example. Institutions have broken down as the military stranglehold on power leads citizens, especially doctors, to boycott large swaths of the economy in protest. And it's gotten so bad that the UN Global Humanitarian Overview reports that a 14-fold increase in those needing humanitarian assistance from 1 million people to over 14 million people, which is more people than live in my home state of Ohio. Further, the Rohingya genocide resulted in over 800,000 desperate people fleeing to Bangladesh and thousands into refugee camps within Burma. And although Bangladesh has garnered a lot of goodwill for its response, and rightfully so, there are areas where that response, let's face it, leaves much to be desired, particularly recently. Going forward, the international community must look for a long-term appropriate resolution to the plight of the Rohingya. The camps around Cox's Bazar cannot be considered a permanent solution. This brings us back to the Burmese military. They are directly responsible for the genocide against the Rohingya and the fact that hundreds of thousands of people are unable to return to Burma. The Tatmadaw has also waged a seemingly endless conflict with Burma's various ethnic minority groups. And it's believed that the junta is responsible for the slaughter of over 1,400 men, women, and children since the coup. And add to that the horrific slaughter on Christmas Eve in a predominantly Christian area of 35 people, including 2 Save the Children workers. To put it bluntly, the military's actions are making Burma essentially unlivable. Since the humanitarian and political crises are intertwined, they must be addressed in tandem. Thus, I would urge the Biden administration to step up its efforts to get the international community more engaged with regard to Burma. As Burma slides towards an all-out civil war, a concerted push now might just make a difference. We should push for the UN to impose an arms embargo on the junta so that it has fewer weapons to murder its own people. And we should support at least those ASEAN nations who have been willing to take a firm stand against the Tatmadaw police state that has replaced a once possible building democracy. This is especially urgent in light of Prime Minister Hun Sen's ill-advised visit to Burma last weekend that did nothing to resolve the crisis, while at the same time, unfortunately, to some degree, legitimizing the junta. As for Congress, we should immediately pass the Burma Act. Congressman, I should say former Congressman, Elliot Engel and I first introduced this bipartisan legislation in 2017 as the genocide unfolded. Last year, Chairman Meeks and I updated the bill to address the coup. The bill sanctions the financial interests of the junta, provides mechanisms to promote accountability for the genocide, and authorizes assistance for humanitarian purposes. Passing the Burma Act would go a long way towards demonstrating that the United States is committed to holding the Tatmadaw accountable and focused on seeing the situation resolved in the best interest of the people of Burma. Again, I want to thank you for asking me to participate in this important forum this morning. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, I have additional responsibilities with respect to Congress. I may not be able to stay on much longer, but I do appreciate the invitation. And as we say here in Congress, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Chabot, for your very important remarks and for the important work that you're doing on Capitol Hill with respect to Burma. I know that the Burmese people are very grateful for your advocacy. My name is Elizabeth Hoffman. I'm the Director for Government Relations and Fellow here at CSIS, and it's my pleasure to moderate the remainder of this panel. I'd like to start by introducing Dan Sullivan, who will give some remarks, followed by Keen Yaw. Dan is the Deputy Director for Africa, Asia, and the Middle East at Refugees International, an independent humanitarian and nonprofit organization. He focuses on Myanmar, Sudan, South Sudan, and other areas affected by mass displacement. Prior to his work at Refugees International, he was a senior policy analyst and director for policy and government relations with United to End Genocide. I will introduce Keen Yaw after Dan's remarks. So please, over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to CSIS's Humanitarian Agenda for hosting this. Also, thank you to Congressman Chabot and to Keen Yaw Pa, both who are longtime champions for the people of Myanmar, whether in Congress or at the front lines of advocacy. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in for this very, very timely and important event as we come upon the 1-year anniversary of the attempted coup by the Myanmar military. I want to talk briefly about to highlight the situation in Myanmar with a focus on the humanitarian situation, and then briefly on a separate but very much related situation of the Rohingya in Bangladesh. But first, just as quick way of introduction, my organization, Refugees International, is an independent advocacy group that promotes solutions to displacement crises around the world. In my work with Refugees International and prior, I've had the opportunity to travel to various places where people displaced from Myanmar have fled, and that's both in internally displaced camps in Rakhine State and Kachin State, and several trips to Bangladesh to speak with Rohingya refugees. My comments today are informed by that experience, as well as recent conversations with humanitarian workers and civil society actors in the region. Myanmar today is facing what UN experts have described as a multi-dimensional crisis. So that is to say it's a political crisis, an economic crisis, a health crisis, humanitarian and human rights. Congressman Chabot mentioned some of the recent massacres that have happened. These atrocities have been a hallmark of what the junta has done prior and especially since the coup. They're very serious human rights violations that amount to crimes against humanity. You also have over 1,400 civilians who have been killed as a result of the coup, hundreds of thousands who have been newly forcibly displaced. And as Congressman Chabot mentioned, we went from 1 million people estimated in need of humanitarian aid to 3 million in the first months following the coup to now more than 14 million as we look into 2022. I think it's important to note, though, that all of these multidimensional crises contribute to the humanitarian situation, but it's not just that the humanitarian crisis is a fallout from the coup. The military has taken direct actions to block aid from getting to various areas. I spoke to a humanitarian worker based in Kachin who said the junta has very much impeded aid provision anywhere they can. This raises obvious concerns with how humanitarians can provide aid to those in need, and is a major warning sign for working through the junta. Rather, humanitarians need to try to find ways to work through credible third parties like the Red Cross and UNHCR. So that's the dire picture of where we are as looking into 2022. So how do we get to what the title of this event is, towards durable solutions? Well, I'd suggest 3 levels of action. 1, international pressure. 2, steps taken to immediately mitigate humanitarian suffering. And 3, continued support for the people who have already fled Myanmar and sought refuge elsewhere. On the first one, there's a need for the United States and other countries to support the people of Myanmar who continue to protest and resist, by taking away the resources that the military has to continue its oppression. So that can be done in 3 main ways. One is making sure that there are increased targeted sanctions, working with other countries around the world, including but not beholden to ASEAN countries, on the military, military-owned enterprises, including oil and gas revenues. Second, that there's a global arms embargo put forward, as has been suggested by the UN General Assembly. And then third, for accountability, supporting accountability. Refugees International has long been pushing for recognition of the crimes that this military, the same military, committed against the Rohingya in 2017 for what they are, which is genocide. And this is important not just for the legitimacy of calling what the evidence overwhelmingly points to, but also for other groups in Myanmar who are suffering from crimes against humanity, to show a strong signal that atrocity crimes will be held accountable. You'll note that in this first level of action, a lot of this echoes what Congressman Chabot said, because a lot of it is contained in the Burma Act. And so certainly, would recommend and love to see that be passed quickly. The second level of action is on mitigating immediate suffering. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are within the distance of borders reachable through cross-border aid, but that hasn't happened. Particularly in Thailand, along the Thai-Myanmar border, there's a well-developed network of civil society that can promote that, and that's something that Kinyapa may speak to a little bit more in a moment. But there's also a need for countries like Thailand, China, India to uphold their international standards and not force refugees back. The third and last course of action is to maintain support for the people who have already been displaced. This includes tens of thousands of people from Myanmar who are in Thailand and Malaysia, and it includes the 1 million Rohingya who remain in Bangladesh. And so just briefly on Bangladesh, I traveled there before the 2017 mass influx of Rohingya refugees, and wrote a report that was titled Safe But Not Secure. And that is just as relevant, if not more so today, where the Rohingya who are in Bangladesh have found refuge, but they're not safe. They're facing increasing security risks within the camps and increasing restrictions by Bangladeshi authorities. And just in recent days, we've seen the destruction of hundreds of shops in markets and informal education centers, a fire where barbed wire that was put up by authorities hindered people's ability to escape. And we see thousands of people being moved to an island in the Bay of Bengal, despite serious questions about voluntariness. So that, Bangladesh deserves a lot of credit for providing refuge and for providing vaccines for the Rohingya, but there's a lot more that they can do and should do and be pushed to do to provide access to education, livelihood opportunities, and freedom of movement. A final suggestion is along the lines of the traditional durable solutions, the need for third country resettlement. This is important to be a part of the solution to the Rohingya crisis, but also we'll see that other people from Myanmar will continue to need opportunities for asylum as the dire consequences of this coup continue to play out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan, for your comments. We now turn to Keen Nya. She's the General Secretary for the Karen Women's Organization, an Indigenous women's organization working to serve and protect the most vulnerable in their community. KWO promotes women's leadership, gender sensitivity, and community ownership to reach the goal of all communities having gender equality, the protection and promotion of Indigenous people's rights, human rights, and justice in Thailand and Burma. Please, over to you, Kenya, for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share humanitarian situation in Burma, particularly in the Karen area, and to discuss about durable solution. Even before the coup, as well as the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, there was over 90,000 refugees living in camps in Thailand, and many more not living in camps and not recognized as refugees. There was already many thousands of IDPs, as well as the Burma army had been expanding their military control into the ethnic areas for many years. Currently, we have over 100,000 internally displaced peoples in the Karen area alone. And even before the coup, as we all know that across Burma and also in the Karen areas, there's countless acts of violence and human rights abuses against the Karen people. And during the recent national ceasefire period, the Burma army greatly increased its military presence in the Karen areas. Burma army road construction, land confiscations increased, and also this has caused more conflict. They committed human rights abuses and war crime, but they were not held accountable. And we have raised these problems many times, but we felt like no one have listened to us or no one paid attention to how dangerous the Burma army was. And also the Burma armies refused to call or refuse all calls from the peaceful protest by the Karen villagers, local leaders, even including the KNU, to leave their territories or demilitarize in the villages area. And in fact, after 2012, many of the international countries started to support Burma army and give them money, trainings, equipment, and those things are now being used against us. And right after the coup, the Burma army launched air attacks in the Karen states in March, the first in almost 30 years. And the airstrike continued for 6 consecutive days. More than 20 civilian deaths, and schools and hospitals were destroyed by the air attacks. And over 3,000 people fled to the Thailand at that time. And also at that time, 90,000 villagers became displaced. Now we see new air strike in our land with a very sophisticated weapons and planes. And air attacks, there's also air attacks in other part of Karen areas, as well as in other ethnic areas in Chin and in the Karen area. Just last night, a hospital was airstruck by the Burma army for the second time within a week. In addition to that, there is continued mortar shelling of villages and constant flyovers by planes and drones. So therefore, families are forced to flee, to hide in the forest, and if they are lucky, to find a cave. So my people are constant alert, afraid and unable to return home. And Burma army soldiers, when they enter the villages, they looted for rice, money, motorbike, farming equipment, anything. And after that, they lay down the landmines in their villages, and even in the kitchen, and also in the farmlands. They arbitrarily and detains hundreds of villagers. They use them as guards through the area or as a human shield. On the ground, there has been fighting between the Burma army, the Korean soldiers, the People Defense Force on a daily basis. So villagers are continue on hiding. My organizations, Korean Women's Organization, together with other community-based organizations who are helping most of the IDPs and refugees that fled to Thailand. And this is not done without a problem. Access to IDPs for delivery humanitarian assistance like food and supply is a big challenge. We must do it very carefully. The Burma army posts are everywhere. They stop you, they shoot you boats, the truck, motorbike. They arrest their people traveling with supplies or hurt them and even kill them. And along the Thai-Burma border, the Thai authorities also not very cooperative. Anyway, like because of our strong network and we work with local people and our experience over 20 years of helping our people, we can find ways to help people on the ground. But of course, it's slower and it's not as smooth as we wanted it should be. In March 2021, over 3,000 people crossed to Thailand for their safety, and they're pushed back to Burma by the Thai army. And also last month in December, over 5,000 people fled again to the Thai side, and most of them are now forced to return to Burma. And many more became IDP. So we have to try to help both the refugees and IDPs with limitations by the Thai army as well as the Burma army. When we try to send humanitarian assistance to these IDPs, it is often blocked or difficult. So it would be better if Thailand allow IDPs to cross over to Thai side and get safe, temporary shelter. It also will be much easier and safer and more efficient to provide humanitarian assistance to people who are collected together in the camps instead of spreading out in the forest along the border. We also, when we talk about the recent refugees that fled to Thai side or become internally displaced people, we also need to keep in mind all of the refugees who have been living in a closed camps for 30 years along the Thai border. Now the refugees receive less than $10 per month to buy food for one adult. And we know that it is impossible to survive on that, but they are also not allowed to leave the camp to find work or earn income. So I think in the short term, we really want the US government to provide direct funding to the local community-based organizations so they can deliver emergency humanitarian aid cross-border in a low-profile way. And also because there are so many people that are still in need of the support, and to so many of them, it's the only way to do it to reach them through the cross-border. We also would like to ask the US government to help influence the Thai government to allow refugees to stay on the Thai soil until the situation in the homeland is better and people are feeling safe to return, as well as to ask the Thai government to allow humanitarian agency to access even a small number of refugees who have crossed to Thailand to be allowed to stay in a couple of temporary camps, because it's hard to get to help those people if they are not in a camp. And of course, to allow the cross-border aids to flow so that we will be able to help those who are in the internally displaced people camp. And we would like the government to increase the part of the food aid to the refugees in the Thai border to $30 per adult per month, so that refugees will have enough and we can live in a dignity. And to also many country governments to encourage the Thai governments to allow refugees to leave the camps, to work to earn incomes, and also to be able to have access to Thai education and healthcare in Thailand. Of course, in the long term, we need to bring down this military dictatorship and end this coup, because they are the main cause of humanitarian crisis, and they are the main cause for the refugees, to flee to the neighboring countries or people become internally displaced. And the international community can support us, by stop arming the military, stop funding the military, deny legitimacy to the military, ensure justice and accountability, and provide political and humanitarian support to the people of Burma. We are making, the people of Burma, we are making huge sacrifice to resist military rules. we do not buy goods and services from the military companies, and a lot of people boycott. They don't buy lottery tickets or pay electricity bills to the military. So these are having an impact on the military. There's continued peaceful protests every day, and local defense force have taken up against the military regime, and the ethnic resistance movement. The resistance groups are fighting the military regime as well. The pressure from the people is having an effect. And of course, the people of Burma will win. We will win our freedom, but we need international community. They can and they must do more to support us, because international companies are the ones who provide arms and equipment and funds to the Burma army. And we know that Western countries have already brought into several rounds of sanctions, but the international community has much more leverage it can use to weaken the military and to support us in our struggle for human rights and democracy. So we asked international to bring in a new round of targeted sanctions, because the military will reduce their revenue, to reduce the military revenue, and also to reduce their capacity to operate and purchase new military equipment. And particularly, we really want the US government to place sanctions on the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise, which is also provided the single largest source of foreign revenue to the military regime. The governments around the world, they need to provide, to apply economic pressure and arm embargoes, and more countries need to support international justice mechanism like the ICC, who are also persecuting the Burmese military. And much more is needed, both political and humanitarian, for the people in Burma, as well as to resist the military rules. So in conclusion, I just would like to emphasize that we would like change will come from the people inside the country, but international community can play an important role to support us. The international community and companies are the ones who are sustaining the military, keep them going. So we need international community to reject the military and instead choose to support the people. And this is what we need to be successful in bringing down the dictatorship, and for us to establish a genuine federal union in Burma. And we need the US to take maximum action against the military regime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan and Kenya, for that comprehensive overview, although rather bleak. I want to start by asking both of you a question. Dan, in your report that was released in October of 2021, which I commend to you all if you haven't seen it on the Refugees International website, and Kenya, you just alluded to this as well, you both argue for increased economic and diplomatic pressure on the junta. Some argue that further economic and diplomatic pressure would simply drive the junta further into China's sphere of influence. Do you agree with this assessment? And could you explain why or why not? Dan, would you like to start off?
Sure. Yeah, I don't agree with that assessment. I think it harkens back to similar conversations that were happening before the coup that prevented a stronger stance against what happened to the Rohingya, which is genocide. And so I think the military coup, I think everyone kind of knew their true colors, and that was really shown with the coup. I think that if the coup the military showed that it is definitely leaning towards China and not towards the United States, and I don't think that there's small things that the U.S. does to hold back pressure is going to turn that military back over to wanting to work with the U.S. And then to Kenya's point, and she can fill this in better than I, but I think just the people of Myanmar, they're not looking at China if China is going to be supporting the military. So I think it's important for the U.S. and others to show solidarity with the people of Myanmar. And then the final thing I'll say is that it's not a set thing that China wants the military to be in charge. They're trying to play both sides and see how things play out. So yeah, I don't think that there's a reason that the U.S. wanting to not push the military closer to China is a reason not to put pressure on them.
Kenya?
Yes, I also I think that China, because of their investment in where they do need stabilities, under this military dictatorship, under this coup, the people will fight in every ways. So it will not create stabilities in Burma, and you will not have how to call it, economic. You cannot invest in the countries that are having a conflict. So and also I think as Dan mentioned, China is playing, and they are the one also who are creating, how do I say that, supporting different groups in Burma. So I think it's very important that the U.S. government, as a democratic government, not to compare, themselves with the Chinese government, because China, at the end, they will also, of course, they will need the stability, but also they will also play and to see who they will support so that they will get benefits out of this conflict. Yeah.
Thank you. And I should add, before I turn to the next question, that if anybody in our audience would like to ask a question, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and please feel free to type a question for either Dan or Kenya, and I will try to get to as many as possible in the short amount of time that we have. Kenya, I want to turn back to you and ask, armed conflict, as you pointed out, armed conflict and displacement is not a new phenomenon for the ethnic region since the coup in 2021. Even during the 10 years of political opening in Myanmar, the relative freedom and opening experienced in major urban areas was not realized in many of the ethnic areas. Has the nature of the conflict in the ethnic areas changed since the coup? And if so, could you explain how? And Dan, feel free to jump in after Kenya if you'd like.
Actually, if you think about the Burma Army operation in the north and in the west of Burma before the coup, the operation against the Rohingya and the nature of the Burma Army attacks are the same, right? The abuses, the pattern that they use are the same. But after the coup, I would say that it spread out more into the other ethnic areas, such as in the Karenni and the state, in the Chain state, as well as down to many of the Karen areas where there was not a big fighting for years. So since now it's across ethnic area, there is more displacements, and people livelihood security are disturbed by the Burma Army. And under the I see that under the SAC, they're more cruel, and you can see that those people who got arrested, they're being tortured to death, and I can't even watch the image of the people that be tortured. So I would say that they're even bolder in killing and torturing the people after the coup. I think this is lead to the, how do you call that, the impunity that they enjoy, because no one hold them accountable. Of course, not in Burma, but international community is very weak in holding the Burma Army accountable to the abuse that they commit. So we really need international community to support, to refer the situation to ICC, and also to support the current ICG case, and more countries need to come out and speak out, in support of accountability and support the victims in Burma, yeah, and to hold the Burma Army accountable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. I mean, I think it's a lot of the same tactics and brutality that the junta has used for years, but just intensified, and in areas where it hadn't been for a number of years. And obviously the increased displacement and humanitarian situation we see as a result of that. But the one other thing I would point out in terms of the ethnic dynamics in Myanmar since the coup is, previous to the coup, there was a lot of other groups were listening to the military about the denials of abuse against the Rohingya. And since the coup, you've seen a lot more solidarity and amongst other ethnic groups, recognizing that, yes, the military very likely has done the same things that they're now doing to other groups, and which they have done to ethnic minority groups over decades.
Kenya, you mentioned ICC referral. This was something that was often brought up by by activist communities in regard to the Rohingya situation. And it seems that the perception in Burma was that the military leaders were truly afraid of being referred to the ICC, and that was something that could act as a deterrent. Do you think that that's still the case? Would ICC referral impede or prevent them from doing some of the actions, or at this point, do you think that it's too late for that to have an impact?
I do think the Burma army are afraid of being referred to the ICC, and because right now a lot of how do you call that, documentations on the abuses that they committed, and they do afraid, and I think right now I think they need to see in actions when more countries are coming up to support the referral of the situations to the ICC. They will be more afraid, like for me right now, because there is still a weak in many countries that are not coming up and supporting, like even the ICJ case. So I think it's give the Burma army a sense that they could continue, and enjoy the impunity. I think once more countries are coming up in supporting of ICC case, they will be more afraid, and then their actions will be, they will be more careful about their action. I would say that, yeah. And I think that's the only way to hold them accountable, because we know that under the military dictatorship, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't hold them accountable. Even under the democratic government, the Burma army still enjoy how do you call that, impunities, and they are above the civilian government. So we really need a true civilian government, and we really need to limit the actions, and we really need international community to hold them accountable. Only that, I think it will stop, the military for continue committing abuses against the people.
We want to turn back to the humanitarian situation, the humanitarian relief efforts. Kenya, as you mentioned, a lot of these efforts are best led by local civil society organizations that really know the situation on the ground, have the trust of the people, and are embedded in the communities. However, local civil society may not have the capacity to distribute the aid that is needed at this time. As Dan mentioned, the rather staggering figure of 3 million people in need of humanitarian assistance when the coup started. Now that's at 14 million people. So and then in addition, large international organizations that do have the capacity to distribute aid often need permission and cooperation with the military junta, which could in turn legitimize their rule. So how does the international community and how do donors think about how to balance this paradox while really wanting to help the Burmese people? And please, I invite both Dan and Kenya to chime in on this question.
I do believe that we have enough civil societies or community-based groups across Burma who will be able to people on the ground. I think in the last 5 years, when the country opened up a little bit, many of the community-based organizations, civil society have built up their capacities, and so they are able to to help the people. And I think the international community, they should work with the national unity government, and together with the community-based organization, because they are based across Burma, whether be it inside Burma or on the border. I think the assistance needs to go through them, because they will be the one who are able to support people on the ground. And I think for me, I would really want the government to support, to give legitimacies to the people elected, governments, the NUG government, so that they could also work together with the community base. I still believe that we'll be able to deliver aid to most needy people if we work together, with the NUG and also all the civil society across Burma.
Yeah, and just before I answer that, I wanted to just going back to Kinya's point to reiterate the importance of going after impunity, and want to point out again that there's an immediate step that the United States can take to show solidarity and to support that fight against impunity, and that is to recognize what happened to the Rohingya as genocide. The State Department's already done a very thorough collection of evidence. They just need to say it publicly. And that's important not just for the Rohingya. Again, that does not preclude further atrocity determinations for other groups. In fact, I think it strengthens the ability to do that in the future. On the humanitarian question, I think it's a really difficult one for the operational humanitarian groups on the ground, for UN agencies. There is that need, and the reality is that most of the aid, you won't be able to get it in through cross-border. Most of it's going to have to come in somehow centrally or be either allowed or acquiesced by the military junta. But as I mentioned before, I think it's really important to avoid going directly through the military junta, because if you're giving aid that's being denied to certain groups and being confiscated and used, then you're violating that humanitarian principle of do no harm. So it's really important to try to find ways to get around to work through credible third parties, whether it's the Red Cross or the having monitoring by the UN Refugee Agency. But that said, even as you work through that very difficult problem, there is that immediate ability to provide aid to at least hundreds of thousands through cross-border aid. And as Kinya mentioned, there's those networks that are already there, that are ready, that can do that. And so that there's no reason to be still waiting on that a year in. That's something that needs to happen very quickly.
I'm going to turn to a question now from the audience. Christina Fink asked, Kinya, how would you evaluate the parallel national unity government's roles in coordinating humanitarian assistance and in coordinating the resistance movement? For those of you that are unaware, the national unity government is a parallel government set up by elected members of the parliament before it was overturned by the coup. Kinya?
The national unity government, they do have the department, the Ministry on Humanitarian and Emergency Ministry, and they do have a policy, and they do work with the ethnic people and ethnic departments like health or education. So I believe that together with national unity government and ethnic social service or departments, we will be able to support the people on the ground who are in need. And also also believe that the national unity government also have a network and the people that on the ground, not in the ethnic area as well. So and they got support from the people on the ground as well, civil society or many religious organizations or many organizations. So I believe that they will be able to work well with different ethnic agency as well as the people in Burma.
Dan, anything you wanted to add?
No, I think Kinya covered that pretty well.
So on the topic of the national unity government, would international recognition by major democracies help legitimize the resistance and provide assistance to the NUG? And what are the pros and cons of recognizing the NUG? And I invite both Kinya and Dan to respond to that question.
Well, I think the national unity government are coming from the people, and we need to respect, the wish of the people and the choice of the people, because the military dictatorship, the currently SEC, it's the one who are taking power over and abusing the people. So if we are respecting the people's choice, we need to support the national unity government. And can you repeat the second part of the question?
Just if there are any drawbacks to the international community recognizing the NUG and what the pros and cons are.
Okay, and we need to if we wanted to to support democracy and the restoration of democracy or a genuine federal union, we need to recognize the NUG as a government, because they are also the one who also committed themselves to work together with everyone to establish towards the building of a federal union, to abolish the military dictatorship, to write a new constitutions that are building up a federal union, and to work together with the other ethnic people. And they already have that commitment, as you can see, even in their government that they formed, they already invited ethnic people to join them. And of course, you know, in every government, there's like things that you could do to make it better. And I think NUG government is doing that. And so we need to support to legitimize the NUG government, so that they have more power, and they work with the people on the ground, and the people are supporting them. And it's very important that we choose to support the people in Burma to end this military coup. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just add, I mean, I think that, you know, the key is to deny legitimacy to the military junta, and to work with the people who the people of Myanmar are supporting. And I think that you know, the one area of caution or thing that needs to be done in working with the NUG, I think, is just making sure that it's inclusive. And particularly thinking of, they have made overtures and statements towards including the Rohingya, for example, but there are also people who are involved with the NUG who were involved with the previous government who had less than welcoming views towards the Rohingya. So I think you know, there needs to be that working with the government that the people have put themselves behind, but making sure that you know, that you continue to make inroads, and making sure that they are truly inclusive towards you know, a more truly democratic government in the future.
So I now want to turn to a question from a CSIS affiliate and former CRS researcher, Mike Martin, who asked if you all could comment about the refugee and IDP situation in Chin and Sanyang, and the Modi government's resistance to the provision of international humanitarian assistance in Mizoram. And I kind of want to expand on that question a little bit and add that, you know, Burma has borders quite a few countries: India, China, Thailand, Bangladesh. And where are there opportunities for the US to increase pressure or to further cooperation on providing humanitarian, IDP, refugee assistance in cooperation with some of these countries? It's not a terribly friendly neighborhood, but we have seen progress in some places. And where is there opportunity for more progress?
Yeah, I'm happy to start on that. I mean, I think the short answer is that there's been a lot more displacement. There have been attacks on, you know, destruction of hundreds of homes in Chin State, and increased violence there. And we have seen that's where the most refugees have fled across the country into India. In my last report, I explored this a little bit, where in India you do have local authorities who have welcomed in refugees, although the government of India does not recognize them as refugees, but have provided aid to those who have sought refuge. This has not been reflected by the national government, but it shows that there are some opportunities there, at least at the local level. I'd say, you know, there's in my comments at the opening, I kind of narrowed in on Thailand because I think the Thai border provides the most immediate opportunity. But I think that the US and others should continue to work with India and push India, and as well as China. I mean, China has provided at least vaccines, COVID vaccines, into ethnic controlled areas across the border. I think that that could be a possible opening, continuing to engage China towards also allowing humanitarian aid. And all of these countries, I think fundamentally there needs to be a push for them not to violate that international standard of non-refoulement. So if people come across the border, they shouldn't be forced back. Excuse me. And we've seen that in all of those countries. And I think, again, maybe with Thailand, there's the most kind of leverage to try to make sure that that happens, and also to make sure that the UN Refugee Agency and international NGOs can get access to those people when they do come across.
Kenya, I know you're particularly focused on the Thai-Burma border. So is there anything you'd like to add about Thailand specifically?
Yes, I already mentioned in my, I think, speech that we really need the Thai government to allow refugees, like people to flee to Thai side, to stay safely, and also not to push them back, and allow humanitarian agency to reach out to the refugees that are fleeing in Thai side. Because right now, even they fled to the Thailand, it's the Thai military that are in control of those who are fleeing, and humanitarian agency have difficulties reaching out to people, and we have to work with the local people to provide support. And it's not that impossible, but it's difficult and challenges. The same to the cross-border. So yeah, we really need the US government, to talk to the Thai government to allow humanitarian to flow to cross-border to the conflict affected area, to the people who are in need. Because right now, I mean, we could deliver the support, but it's much harder. If it allowed and officially allowed by the Thai government, then we could do much more effective, so we really need the Thai government to allow to open up that opportunities for refugees, as well as for the people, like for us to be able to support cross-border aid.
And I just add that there were some positive indications on the allowing of cross-border from Thailand when the State Department counselor, Derek Chalet, traveled there in the fall, but we really haven't seen movement on that since. So it needs to be continually raised. And as I said, we're almost a year in. There's no reason to wait any longer.
Yeah, also, I would like to highlight again for we are talking about the recent refugees that are fleeing, but we also need to think about those who are living in the refugee camps for over 30 years. The amount of support that they get is very little. I mentioned already, it's less than $10 per month per adult, and we know that it's not practical, to survive on that amount of funding. And so we need the increased support, humanitarian aid, food aid to the refugees, or we really need like the durable solutions, like the integration, or even for the Thai government to open an opportunity for the refugees to leave the camp to be able to work and support back their families, or also have their children to be able to continue their education outside of the refugee camps. Otherwise, they've been there for over 30 years, and a lot of children are born there, or they grew up there, they have no future. So we really need also to think about that solution, and yeah, right now with the continued conflict and people fleeing, and of course the resettlement to the third country, at another durable solution also need to be opened up, and the Thai government should be able also to open up that opportunity as well.
Thank you. Kenya, I want to ask you, particularly in your role as General Secretary of the Karen Women's Organization, women often bear the burden of political instability and conflict. How has this played out and manifested in the current situation in Burma? And how does your organization and the many other women's organizations that have existed for so long help to support women facing these difficult circumstances?
Yes. Yeah, of course, apart from the brutality and torture that the Burma Army committed to everyone, regardless of their gender, of course, women are also suffering from sexual violence and sexual harassment. And those who are fleeing the conflicts, particularly like pregnant women, newborn mothers, that they face even, I don't know, double or triple difficulties. Because of the displacements, they do not get enough nutrition food, and therefore have negative impact on their pregnancy. And some women, they will have difficulties in deliveries, the babies, and some of them, have died because of, this issue, because there's not health center that are near that could help them. And because of the poor nutrition, some do not have good, breast milk to feed the baby. But what we do is, because KWO is a community-based organization, so KWO on the ground, we work with the community, and also we work with the health clinic. We try to support nutrition food that needs to the mothers, as well as provide newborn babies and the mother if they need milk, and provide support, and not just to the newborn baby and pregnant women, also to the most vulnerable people, particularly the elderly and the sick and people with disabilities, because during the displacements and conflict time, these are the people that are facing the hardship, hardship. And just last year in 2021, we were able to provide, a lot to these women. And of course, we also need to work with the Thai authorities here for the referral of the especially women with the difficulties of giving pregnant women to be able to access to the Thai hospital, crossing the border as well. So yes, KWO, and not just KWO, also together our other organizations, and we work together with the health centers and helping those women. Yeah.
Thank you. So I want to ask one final question and invite you to also include any kind of concluding thoughts you have in your response to this. The international donor community and policymakers are often focused on the crisis at hand, which right now in Burma is very large and very massive and complex. However, it's clear that the Burmese people have rejected military rule, and at some point there will be a transition because what's happening just is not sustainable. So what should the international community be thinking about to prepare for an eventual transition of rule? What investments can be made? What types of activities should be happening to make sure that when that day does come, that Burma and the Burmese people will be prepared and set up for success?
Sure, I can try to tackle that first. It's a big question. I mean, obviously there's a need to create the conditions that are conducive for people to come home safely, and for people just to stop the atrocities that are happening right now. So that needs to continue to be the focus. But yeah, it's very important to start thinking also further down the road. And part of that is, like I said, just making sure that the next government that comes in is truly inclusive and can be more of a democratic voice for the people of Myanmar. And then, I think a lot of the discussions and explorations were already happening from development groups like the World Bank, looking at ways that they can get in and try to help with the building up the health infrastructure and different things. The big caution is, and we saw this happening in Rakhine State before the coup, was that if you start doing those development projects while people who have already been displaced from certain areas, you're effectively just reinforcing the effects of ethnic cleansing. And so I think in different parts of Myanmar, you'll have similar questions of people who've been forced from their homes, making sure that any kind of development projects are equal and inclusive, and then that's echoed in the government that comes forward. And then just as a kind of final word from me, I'll say we've painted a pretty dire picture here. But I do think there's a lot of things, there's a lot of actions that can be taken. I set out a lot of those. I mean, support the Burma Act and, continue to support with humanitarian aid the people who you can reach, starting with cross-border aid. I think there's a lot more that can be done internationally. I just hope that we have a lot of these sort of dire anniversaries. And we have this one coming up from the coup, but I hope that the attention that brings in the press and internationally can help to spur some of these positive actions, because there are a lot that can be taken. Thanks.
I also wanted to support Jan in Burma. The inclusiveness, it's very important because Burma is diverse. and people need to feel like they are part of the process in rebuilding their country. And we need to make sure that, you know, everyone feel that they can participate freely, equally, on equal ground, you know. And so that is very important. And also the recognitions of the ethnic how do you call it, identities. It's very important, because the ethnic people, we feel like our voice is not being heard, our identity is not respected, our administration is not recognized at all. And so I think there is a huge capacity in Burma that we need to build on, and we have to be careful not to repeat the mistake of, you know, how to call that, supporting the centralized government and the democratic government. It's taking over into the ethnic areas and impose their policies or their how to call it, into the ethnic area. That is very important. And as a woman, I have to say that in the case of Burma, like we have three fights, right? Other people like the Burman themselves, we have to fight for democracy. The ethnic people, we fight for democracy and ethnic rights. As the women, we also fight for women's rights. So in all the process, we also need women participation, a genuine one, not just the token or, you know, just the number, but we really need a genuine women participation in the process. So we really need everyone that are supporting and Burma to keep this in mind. Yeah, that Burma is a diverse, and everyone needs to be like, need to feel like they're part of the process, and that also women, also women rights need to be considered at the same time when we are fighting for this, and not to be left out.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much to the CSIS Humanitarian Agenda for hosting this important event, to Congressman Chabot for his opening remarks, and to Dan and Kenya for both your important insights and the important work that you do and continue to do on behalf of the Burmese people. So thank you very much, and we hope everybody has a good rest of your day.
Thank you.